Hi, I'm Stephen Keller, and welcome to the LumenVox.com training video, where we'll talk about integrating the LumenVox.com speech engine, or any automatic speech recognition engine, with your PBX application, telephony platform, what have you, using either an API or an MRCP style integration. Now, if you're not familiar with these terms, we'll get started by covering what they mean, and then we'll talk in this part of the video series about the benefits that each one has to offer. So probably the first thing to do is to define exactly what we're talking about. MRCP, which stands for Media Resource Control Protocol, is an agreed upon standard of having various media resources, talking about things like speech engines, text-to-speech engines, fax resources, platforms, PBXs, all these different things talk to one another using an agreed-upon standard method of communication. There are two versions of MRCP, version 1 and version 2. Version 2 is still in draft status as of this video, and the two are fairly different from one another. So eventually, if you decide to do MRCP, you also have to decide to do version 1, which they're both, by the way, based around using network communication. Version 1 uses the real-time streaming protocol, RTSP, to control its packets, so the data coming between applications is controlled via RTSP. Version 2 uses session initiation protocol, SIP, which is, for instance, the same control method used in a lot of voice-over IP applications. So those are what MRCP is. It exists as a standard. A bunch of different applications all share this same standard. Now, the API, or Application Programming Interface, is a vendor-specific kind of method of talking to a resource. And it's, in fact, generic across the software industry. This API, a very common term. Basically, what it means is the creator of a resource, like a speech engine in LumenVox's case, makes available a bunch of different functions that you can use in your programming language to actually write a direct integration from your application into ours. So you kind of hook our application into yours using these functions we publish. And we have both a C and C++ API for our speech engine, and it's part of the software development kit. You get all that documentation and access to the various libraries you need to include the functions in your application. Now, of course, that means it's going to be different for everybody, like I mentioned. Now, each of these has its own benefits. The big benefit of MRCP is that you have one interface for, say, speech engines, and it will work even if you're using our speech engine or a different automatic speech recognizer. That's the whole point in having a standard. You don't have to completely write a new interface every time you plug in a new resource. Another great thing is, like I said, MRCP is network-based. It uses standard method of talking across network connections. Now, both your application and the resource can be on the same machine. They can be on different machines. It makes no difference. It's a more abstract method of communicating between applications than a more direct API-level integration. And this has some cool benefits. Like, one is maybe your client application runs on some embedded hardware, or it's an embedded application running on some real small hardware that we don't support. There's no way we can have a build for that specific kind of processor or operating system, whatever. Well, if you are going to do a direct API level integration, you have to have our client and libraries installed on the same machine as your application, because an API level integration is really going to be on the exact same machine. That's how it works. It's not abstracted over the network. Well, MRCP is, so if you have some embedded system, you could have your application running on that embedded system and then just talk to our speech engine or your other resources via network connections and have us running on some other machine just talking to us using TCP/IP. On the other hand, the API level integration has a lot of real pros to it as well. A big one is going to be that you have more functions. Any standard method of communicating between applications is going to have the limitation MRCP has, which is the functionality that you get is a subset of the total functionality available to you. Every vendor has some features that other vendors don't have. Well, those can't exist in the standard, the MRCP standard. It can't have them because it's a standard method. Everybody that supports MRCP has to support these features. But if I have some features in my speech engine that aren't in another speech engine, that's not going to be part of the MRCP standard, obviously. So with an API level integration, you get all the features we have. Now, one note, MRCP does allow for some vendor-specific type tags. We can add vendor-specific stuff that only we support, that you can talk to via MRCP. But once you start having to support all these different vendor-specific tags in your MRCP interface, it completely defeats the purpose of building a standard interface for multiple resources, right? Another great thing is with API, we're pretty flexible. Let's say you come to us and want a new feature. We look at it, we say, yeah, that makes sense. That's a feature we should have. We can go ahead and add it to our engine and then make a function available to you so you can use it. And we can do that really quickly. Now, if you want us to make that function available to you via MRCP, we can't just call up the governing standards bodies and say, we want a new function because our customer wants to use it. That's not going to fly. These standards take a long time to get developed and this kind of thing, so we can't just say, add in this new one right now. Again, you could use vendor-specific tags, but defeats the purpose. So API-level integration lets us be much more flexible in adding and changing stuff per customer requests. And kind of along the same lines, with API, we make a real solid attempt to make everything backward compatible. What I mean is, if you originally wrote your application for an older version of our engine, and then you upgrade your engine without changing your application, it will still work. Even if you're using older functions or using functions in an older way, we always go out of our way to make sure that we don't break your stuff when we upgrade new things. This isn't the case with standards. MRCP v1 and MRCP v2 are not exactly compatible. I mean, they completely changed the control protocol, for instance, right? Standards bodies just are not that interested in backwards compatibility generally. They're interested in coming with a standard method, and they're okay throwing out old things. So that can be a bit of a problem. It's a lot of work to do that kind of thing. With the API, you have our assurances that we're going to do everything we can to not break your applications just because you've upgraded to the newest engine. So there are some drawbacks to each, and we'll cover those in the next video. Along with, we'll talk a little bit about how to come up with which is a better fit for you. Certain organizations will prefer one versus the other. We'll talk about how to do some of that analysis. In the meantime, we have more information on the website at lumenvox.com. You can click on resources and come up to a white paper on this very subject that has a lot more detail on API versus MRCP integration. And we also have a bunch of other training videos, very similar to this one, on a whole host of topics. If you go to support and click on videos, you'll have access to all of those.